Begins the reading of chapters 3, 4, and half of chapter 5 for Farewell to Manzanar. Chapter 3, A Different Kind of Sand. We woke early, shivering, and coated with dust that had blown up through the knotholes and in through the slits around the doorway. During the night, Mama had unpacked all our clothes and heaped them on our beds for warmth. Now our cubicle looked as if a great laundry bag had exploded and then been sprayed with fine dust. A skin of sand covered the floor. I looked over Mama's shoulder at Keo, on top of his fat mattress, buried under jeans and overcoats and sweaters. His eyebrows were gray, and he was starting to giggle. He was looking at me, at my gray eyebrows and coated hair, and pretty soon we were both giggling. I looked at Mama's face to see if she thought Keo was funny. She lay very still next to me on our mattress, her eyes scanning everything, bare rafters, walls, dusty kids, scanning slowly. And I think the mask on her face would have cracked had not Woody's voice just then come at us through the wall. He was rapping on the planks as if testing to see if they were hollow. "Hey!" he yelled. "You guys fallen into the same flour barrel as us?" "No," Keo yelled back. "Ours is full of Japs." All of us laughed at this. "Well, tell him it's time to get up," Woody said. "If we're going to live in this place, we better get to work." He gave us 10 minutes to dress. Then he came in carrying a broom, a hammer, and a sack full of tin can lids he had scrounged somewhere. Woody would be our leader for a while, now short, stocky, grinning behind his mustache. He had just turned 24. In later years, he would tour the country with Mr. Moto, the Japanese tag team wrestler, as his sinister assistant Suki karate chops through the ropes from outside the ring, a chunky leg reaching from under his kimono to trip up Mr. Moto's foe. In the ring, Woody's smile looked sly and crafty. He hammed it up. Off stage, it was whimsical, as if some joke were bursting to be told. So Woody has a very nice smile. "Hey, brother, Ray Keo," he said. "You see these tin can lids?" Yeah, the boy said drowsily, as if going back to sleep. They were both young versions of Woody. "You see all them knotholes in the floor and in the walls?" They looked around. You could see about a dozen. Woody said, "You get those covered up before breakfast time. Any more sand comes in here through one of them knotholes, you have to eat it off the floor with ketchup." "What about sand that comes in through the cracks?" Keo said. Woody stood up very straight, which in itself was funny, since he was only about 5'6". "Don't worry about the cracks," he said. "Different kind of sand comes in through the cracks." He put his hand on his hips and gave Keo a sternly comic look, squinting at him through one eye the way Papa would when he was asserting his authority. Woody mimicked Papa's voice. "And I can tell the difference, so be careful." The boys laughed and went to work nailing down lids. May started sweeping out the sand. I was helping Mama fold the clothes we'd use for cover when Woody came over and put his arms around her shoulder. He was short. She was even shorter, under 5 feet. He said softly, "You okay, Mama?" She didn't look at him. She just kept folding clothes and said, "Can we get the cracks covered too, Woody?" Outside, the sky was clear, but icy gusts of wind were buffeting out our barracks every few minutes, sending fresh dust puffs up through the floorboards. May's broom could barely keep up with it, and our oil heater could scarcely hold its own against the drafts. "We'll get this whole place as tight as a barrel, Mama. I already met a guy who told me where they pile all the scrap lumber." "Scrap?" "That's all they got. I mean, they're still building the camp, 16 blocks left to go. After that, They say maybe we'll get some stuff to fix the insides a little bit. Her eyes blazed then, her voice quietly furious. Woody, we can't live like this. Animals live like this. It was hard to get Woody down. He kept smiling when everybody else was ready to explode. Grief flickered in his eyes. He blinked it away and hugged her tighter. We'll make it better, Mama. You watch. We could hear voices in the other cubicles now. Beyond the wall, Woody's baby girl started to cry. I have to go over to the kitchen, he said. See if those guys got a pot for heating bottles. That oil stove takes too long. Something wrong with the fuel line. I'll find out what they're giving us for breakfast. Probably hot cakes with soy sauce, Keo said, on his hands and knees between the bunks. No, Woody grinned, heading out the door. Rice, with log cabin syrup and melted butter. Chapter 4, A Common Master Plan. I don't remember what we ate that first morning. I know we stood for half an hour in cutting wind waiting to get our food. Then we took it back to the cubicle and ate huddled around the stove. Inside, it was warmer than when we left because Woody was already making good his promise to Mama, tacking up some ends of lath he'd found, stuffing rolled paper around the doorframe. Trouble was, he had almost nothing to work with. Beyond his temporary weather stripping, there was little else he could do. Months went by, in fact, before our home changed much at all from what it was the day we moved in. Bare floors, blanket partitions, one bulb in each compartment dangling from a roof beam, and open ceilings overhead so that mischievous boys like Ray and Keo could climb up into the rafters and peek into anyone's life. The simple truth is the camp was no more ready for us when we got there than we were ready for it. We had only the dimmest idea of what to expect. Most of the families like us had moved out from Southern California with as much luggage as each person could carry. Some old men left Los Angeles wearing Hawaiian shirts and Panama hats and stepped off the bus at an altitude of 4,000 feet with nothing available but sagebrush and tar paper to stop the April winds pouring down off the back side of the Sierras. The War Department was in charge of all the camps at this point. They began to issue military surplus from the First World War: olive drab knit caps, earmuffs, pea coats, canvas leggings. Later on, sewing machines were shipped in, and one barracks was turned into a clothing factory. An old seamstress took a peacoat of mine, tore the lining out, opened and flattened the sleeves, added a collar, put armholes in, and handed me back a beautiful cape. By fall, dozens of seamstresses were working full time, transforming thousands of these old army clothes into capes, slacks, and stylish coats. But until that factory got going and packages from friends outside began to fill out our wardrobes, warmth was more important than style. I couldn't help laughing at Mama, walking around in army earmuffs and a pair of wide-cuffed, khaki-colored wool trousers, several sizes too big for her. Japanese are generally smaller than Caucasians, and almost all these clothes were oversized. They flopped, they dangled, they hung. It seems comical looking back. We were a band of Charlie Chaplins marooned in the California desert, but at the time, it was pure chaos. That's the only way to describe it. The evacuation had been so hurriedly planned, the camps so hastily thrown together. Nothing was completed when we got there, and almost nothing worked. I was sick continually with stomach cramps and diarrhea. At first, it was from the shots they gave us for typhoid in very heavy doses and in assembly line fashion. Swab, jab, swab, move along now. Swab, jab, swab, keep it moving. That knocked all of us younger kids down at once with fevers and vomiting. Later, it was the food that made us sick, young and old alike. The kitchens were too small and badly ventilated. Food would spoil from being left out too long. That summer, when the heat got fierce, it would spoil faster. The refrigeration kept breaking down. The cooks, in many cases, had never cooked before. Each block had to provide its own volunteers. Some were lucky and had a professional or two in their midst, but the first chef in our block had been a gardener all his life and suddenly found himself preparing 3 meals a day for 250 people. The Manzanar runs became a condition of life. Runs is like when you have to poop, so the Manzanar poops became a condition of life, and you only hoped that when you rushed to the latrine, one would be in working order. That first morning, on our way to the chow line, Mama and I tried to use the women's latrine in our block. The smell of it spoiled what little appetite we had. Outside, men were working in an open trench up to their knees in muck, a common sight in the months to come. Inside, the floor was covered with excrement, and all 12 bowls were erupting like a row of tiny volcanoes. So the toilet is filled with poop, and the poop is like erupting inside of the toilets. Mama stopped a kimono wrapped woman stepping past us with her sleeve pushed up against her nose and asked, "What do you do?" "Try block 12," the woman said, grimacing. "They have just finished repairing the pipes." It was about 2 city blocks away. We followed her over there and found a line of women waiting in the wind outside the latrine. We had no choice but to join the line and wait with them. Inside, it was like all the other latrines. Each block was built to the same design, just as each of the 10 camps from California to Arkansas was built to a common master plan. It was an open room over a concrete slab. The sink was a long metal throw across one wall with a row of spit pots for hot and cold water. Down the center of the room, 12 toilet bowls were arranged in 6 pairs back to back with no partitions. My mother was a very modest person. That means she's shy. And this was going to be agony for her. Pain. It's going to be pain for her. Sitting down in public among strangers. One old woman had already solved the problem for herself by dragging in a large cardboard carton. She set it up around one of the bowls like a 3-sided screen. Oxydol was printed in large black letters down the front. I remember this well because that was the soap we were issued for laundry. Later on, the smell of it would permeate these rooms. The upended carton was about 4 feet high. The old woman behind it wasn't much taller. When she stood, only her head showed over the top. She was about Granny's age. With great effort, she was trying to fold the sides of the screen together. Mama happened to be at the head of the line now. As she approached the vacant bowl, she and the old woman bowed to each other from the waist. Mama then moved to help her with the carton, and the old woman said very graciously in Japanese, "Would you like to use it?" Happily, gratefully, Mama bowed again and said, "Arigato." Thank you. "Arigato gozaimasu." Thank you very much. "I will return it to your barracks." "Oh no, it is not necessary. I will be glad to wait. The old woman unfolded one side of the cardboard while Mamma opened the other. Then she bowed again and scurried out the door. Those big cartons were a common sight in the spring of 1942. Eventually, sturdier partitions appeared, one or two at a time. The first were built of scrap lumber. Word would get around that block such and such had partitions now, and Mama and my older sisters would walk halfway across the camp to use them. Even after every latrine in camp was screened, this quest for privacy continued. Many would wait until late at night. Ironically, because of this, midnight was often the most crowded time of all. Like so many of the women there, Mama never did get used to the latrines. It was a humiliation she just learned to endure. Shkatagani, this cannot be helped. She would quickly subordinate her own desires to those of the family or the community because she knew cooperation was the only way to survive. At the same time, she placed a high premium on personal privacy, respected it in others, and insisted upon it for herself. Almost everyone at Manzanar had inherited this pair of traits from the generations before them who had learned to live in a small, crowded country like Japan. Because of the first, they were able to take a desolate stretch of wasteland and gradually make it livable. But the entire situation there, especially in the beginning, the packed sleeping quarters, the communal mess halls, the open toilets, all this was an open insult to that other private self. A slap in the face you were powerless to challenge. Remember, for homework, you only had to read half of chapter 5, stopping at page 34. This begins chapter 5, Almost a Family. At 7, I was too young to be insulted. The camp worked on me in a much different way. I wasn't aware of this at the time, of course. No one was, except maybe Mama, and there was little she could have done to change what happened. It began in the mess hall. Before Manzanar, mealtime had always been the center of our family scene. In camp and afterward, I would often recall with deep yearning the old round wooden table in our dining room in Ocean Park, the biggest piece of furniture we owned, large enough to seat 12 or 13 of us at once. A tall row of elegant, lath-turned saddles separated this table from the kitchen, allowing talk to pass from one room to the other. Dinners were always noisy, and they were always abundant with great pots of boiled rice, platters of homegrown vegetables, fish, papa caught. He would sit at the head of this table, with Mama next to him, serving, and the rest of us arranged around the edges according to age, down to where Keo and I sat, so far away from our parents. It seemed at the time we had our own enclosed nook inside this world. The grown-ups would be talking down at their end, while we two played our secret games, making eyes at each other when Papa gave the order to begin to eat, racing with chopsticks to scrape the last grain from our rice bowls, eyeing Papa to see if he had noticed who won. Now, in the mess halls, after a few weeks had passed, we stopped eating as a family. Mama tried to hold us together for a while, but it was hopeless. Granny was too feeble, feeble means weak. Granny was too feeble to walk across the block 3 times a day, especially during heavy weather, so May brought food to her in the barracks. My older brothers and sisters, meanwhile, began eating with their friends or eating somewhere blocks away in the hope of finding better food. The word would get around that the cook over in Block 22, say, really knew his stuff, and they would eat a few meals over there to test the rumor. Camp authorities frowned on mess hall hopping and tried to stop it, but the good cooks liked it. They liked to see long lines outside their kitchens and would work overtime to attract a crowd. Younger boys like Ray would make a game of seeing how many mess halls they could hit in one meal period. Be the first in line at block 16, gobble down your food, run to 17, by the middle of the dinner hour, gulp another helping, and hurry to 18 to make the end of that chow line and stuff in the third meal of that evening. Keo and I were too young to run around, but often we would eat in gangs with other kids while the grown ups sat at another table. I confess, I enjoyed this part of it at the time. We all did. A couple of years after the camps opened, sociologists studying the life noticed what had happened to the families. They made some recommendations and edicts went out that families must start eating together again. Most people resented this. They griped and grumbled. They were in the habit of eating with their friends. And until the mess hall system itself could be changed, not much could really be done. It was too late. My own family, after 3 years of mess hall living, collapsed as an integrated unit. Whatever dignity or feeling of filial strength we may have known before December 1941 was lost, and we did not recover it until many years after the war. Not until after Papa died, and we began to come together, trying to fill the vacuum his passing left in all our lives. The closing of the camps in the fall of 1945 only aggravated what had begun inside. Papa had no money then and could not get work. Half of our family had already moved to the East Coast where jobs had opened up for them. The rest of us were relocated into former defense workers' housing project in Long Beach. In that small apartment, there never was enough room for all of us to sit down for a meal. We ate in shifts, and I yearned all the more for our huge round table in Ocean Park. Soon after we were released, I wrote a paper for a seventh grade journalism class describing how we used to hunt reunion before the war. The whole family would go down to Ocean Park Beach after dark when the grunion was running and build a big fire on the sand. I would watch Papa and my older brothers splash through the moonlight surf to scoop out the fish. Then we'd rush back to the house where Mama would fry them and set the sizzling pan on the table with soy sauce and horseradish for a midnight meal. I ended the paper with this sentence: the reason I want to remember this is because I know we'll never be able to do it again. That is the end of the reading of chapters 3, 4, and half of chapter 5. Remember, you had to create a notice and wonder chart and write down any vocabulary words that you did not know. Keep in mind that for the next class, we'll be talking about how Manzanar is affecting the Japanese family.